Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Hey, be fun? Let's look at some bones. Today we're going to be talking about the pelvic girdle. So, the pelvic girdle, aside from being a very frustrating structure for me because it doesn't have a whole lot of interesting etymology that I can get into, it is actually a really important structure, even if I don't like it because of words. Uh, the main function of it, just like the pectoral girdle, is to attach the lower limbs to the axial skeleton, whereas the pectoral girdle attaches the upper limb to the axial skeleton. It also transmits weight to the lower limbs, and it supports and protects the pelvic organs, like you've got the bladder and the intestines and a handful of others. If you compare it to the pectoral girdle, there are a few key differences here, other than obviously structurally and location and name. Uh, they do both secure limbs to the axial skeleton, but if you think about your range of motion between your arm and your leg, in your shoulder socket, you have a lot more range of motion than you do in your leg. That comes as the sacrifice that your hip bone makes in order to be a much more secure structure. So the pelvic girdle is made up of three bones. You have the sacrum, which is part of the vertebral column, which you can see here. It's this guy right here. You also have the os coxae. Os is in bone, and coxa, which means hip, but it's not especially interesting. There are two of them. This is one over here, and this is one over here as well. So those are the three bones that make up the pelvic girdle. Both coxal bones have three regions themselves. There is a picture on the next slide, so don't get worried right now. You have the ilium, which is the superior region of the coxal bone. That's made up of the iliac crest, which that's the part of your hip that you actually put your hand on. If you put your hand on your hip, that's the part that's the bony structure that you're feeling there. Is the iliac crest. That right there is a bell. It goes off when it's the least convenient for me, and it seems to be going on forever. There we go. Okay. You also have the greater sciatic notch. That's where the big old sciatic nerve passes through. It kind of you'll see in the next picture how it could kind of latch under there. It's actually a pretty interesting structure itself. It becomes the sciatic foramen when there's another ligament that reaches across. But we're going to go with greater sciatic notch because we're talking about bones. The sciatic nerve is the big nerve there that goes down your rear end. It's a pretty interesting structure. Then you've got the ischium or the ischium. I've heard both pronunciations. Either is fine. There's the posterior and the inferior region of the coxal bones. You have in the ischium or the ischium, you have the lesser sciatic notch. Even though it's called lesser, it's still perfectly fine. It's not any less useful than the greater sciatic notch. It's just smaller, which is fine. You've got the ischial tuberosity or the ischial tuberosity. That's the part of the hip bone that you actually sit on. You sit down, it's really strong. It's the strongest part of the entire pelvic girdle. Then you have the pubis, which is also known as the pubic bone. Neither of those are acceptable for this class. That's the anterior region of the coxal bones. On those bones, you have the pubic symphysis or the pubic symphyses, which is also sometimes referred to as the symphysis pubis. That sounds a lot fancier to me, but I don't know. I like to think of myself as a man of the people, so I go with pubic symphysis. It's a joint of fibrocartilage. It's a fibrocartilage disc that rests between pubic bones. It doesn't rest. It connects the two pubic bones together. Right? Those two pubic bones at that joint also make up the pubic arch or the pubic angle. That's if you've ever watched any kind of crime show, you may have seen them able to identify if it's male or female by looking at the pubic bone. That's what they're talking about here. If it's an acute angle, like a smaller angle there, then that is more likely to be a male. The more rounded, the more obtuse that angle is, the more likely it is to be a female. In addition to those three primary regions that we have, we also have a few fusion points. Oh no, go away. I can't read the thing. There we go. You have a few structures at the fusion points between those three. Oh, I should also mention those three are originally independent bones when you're a baby, and they eventually fuse together as you become an adult. At one of the fusion, or at a fusion point between all three of those regions, is the acetabulum, or I've also heard acetabulum. That's actually kind of an interesting word. It has aceta, which, like we just dealt with vinegar in the lab. Acetic acid is the chemical name for vinegar. So it's called like vinegar cup, which looks like a cup. I don't know exactly why they call it a vinegar cup, but it's a fun word to say either way. That's on the lateral surface of the coxal bones, and that is where the femur head articulates, which we'll talk about in another video. You also have the obturator foramen, or obturator foramen, whichever. That's created between the pubis and the ischium, which we will see in the next slide. Okay, so right away, you may be looking at this and have no idea what you're even looking at here. This is one of those that you're really going to want to take time to look at in the lab when you have the chance. So make sure that you have enough time to look at this in person, right? You see here, this region right here is the ilium. Okay, this part. Then you have the pubis, or the pubic bone. Okay. And the ischium, is this part, right? The purple. On top of that, you have right here, this whole part is called the iliac crest. That's the part of your hip that you actually put your hands on. When you put your hands on your hip, that's that right there on that side. Okay. And this is looking at it like if you're looking at someone from the side, that like this is the acetabulum or the acetabulum. That's where the head of the femur actually goes into. Right? Right here is the greater sciatic notch. It's a pretty great notch. I'm not gonna lie. They named that one pretty well. I don't know why they had to demean the other sciatic notch, but we've talked about how anatomists are jerks, and that's just how we have to move on with our lives. Like right here is the lesser sciatic notch. The sciatic nerve kind of just runs right through here. It's actually right here that ligament I was talking about creates that foramen, but you don't need to worry about that. Just know that that's the greater sciatic notch. That's the lesser sciatic notch. This right here, that's the part that you sit on, the ischial tuberosity, right? Then you have right here, the obturator foramen. And obturator means I don't think it actually comes from the same word, but like to obstruct, to block. This is usually filled up with a membranous tissue that blocks this out. There's a little bit of stuff running through it, but not really a whole lot. No, even though it's a pretty useful hole that like they could put, the body could have allotted something for, but it's just how it goes sometimes. All right, so hopefully this next picture will help you arrange this a little bit better spatially. Right here, you see, again, this is one of the cocci, one of the hip bones, right? And that's the other on this side. Then you have the sacrum right here, which we've talked about. And then the coccyx, tailbone, right? You can see that it actually articulates directly with the sacrum, right? But then you have this part here is the ilium, this whole top flaring out part, right? The iliac crest, and that's the same on this side. The iliac crest is here. This is all the ilium. It's all part of the ilium. And you have the pubis right here. It comes down here. Then the pubic symphysis. It's that fibrocartilage joint. Puts these two together. And you see that right here, there's it's a fairly acute angle. Right? Then you have the ischium. This part right here. You see on this side, it's over here too. And you can see where all three of these kind of come together is where the acetabulum is, or acetabulum. Okay, and that's where the head of the femur actually fits into, right? Then you have the obturator foramen. And again, that's just a pretty fancy spot where nothing happens, all right? I think that is all of the slides on here. Yep, all right. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Make sure you're using Quizlet to study, and hope you enjoyed this episode of whatever I called this before.